All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm your host for this month's Azure Community Stand-Up for App Service. My name is Brittain, and I am a product manager for App Service here at Microsoft. Our usual host, Byron, is out, so today you have me. And I'm joined here by Mr. Gregory, who will be talking to us about deploying SpringBoot Apps on App Service. But before we get there, I do want to make one quick announcement. Let me present this screen over here. That we have a recent announcement to make for price reduction. For JBoss EAP on App Service, it's a pretty major price reduction of about 63%. And this is across all available SKUs that you can run JBoss EAP on App Service on. And this is for the licensing fees. All those JBoss EAP licensing fees have been drastically reduced. You can even see it over here in the pricing calculator that this price right here is much, much lower than it used to be. So all good news for running JBoss EAP on App Service. So with that quick announcement out of the way, there's all kinds of exciting things going on at App Service, but I want to turn it over to Gregory if you want to introduce yourself, and then we can get rolling with some SpringBoot app deployments to App Service.
All right. Thank you for the introduction, Denver. And it's always good to start with some good news, and price reduction is definitely a good news. So as Denver mentioned, I'm Gregory. I'm a developer for Java on App Service, which is Azure's platform as a service offering. And I'm going to go through the very basics of setting up and deploying a SpringBoot application on App Service. So without further ado, I think we can begin. Denver, let me know when my screen is showing.
We're good. It's there.
All right. Awesome. So what we have here is a basic app that just shows this page, very minimal application. We have the code here, and it's currently running locally on my machine, which is great, but we want to run it in the cloud. So the first step is to create an app service, a web app. So the easiest way to do this is through the portal. It's also possible to do this entirely through the CLI, but I'm going to demonstrate this through the portal just because it's the easiest and most graphic way of doing things.
Perfect.
So,
like Bicep or other templates too, right? If you want to, automate things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We have many different options for automation. We have various templates, ARM templates. We'll see actually after I create the app through the portal that there's an option to save all of the settings that you chose during creation as a template and then be able to deploy that template again. Of course, we want things to be as easy as possible, to be as consistent as possible, and saving configuration definitely helps with that. Yes. So this is the portal and the create a resource interface. We're going to go to web app and create, and we'll give that a second. So I currently have my private test subscription, which this will be the subscription that the user is using for that particular application. Billing isn't really something that I worry about as an internal employee, but that's relevant to the customer, to the user. So that's where that's selected. I'll go ahead and create a new resource group for this. So a resource group is a collection of related resources, as the name might suggest. And it's mostly an organizational tool, but things being within the same resource group can also make adding other Azure products to the application easier in the future. So let's call this Spring Demo 3. And that's because we already have a Spring Demo 1 and 2. The
unique host, you could have called it whatever you want, right? Because now we can do totally unique host names with that new hash that gets added in there.
That is correct.
That's new. Very recent.
Yes, this is extraordinarily recent. I don't think that this was here last week.
Yeah, I think that was the this week thing.
Yes. So that's really good if you're creating, like I said, through the CLI, if you're automatically creating a lot of apps, this will make it so that you probably won't intersect with an existing application name, which was a problem in the past. So a lot of the applications, I used my alias, which is GRGOLDSH, so that they're unique to me. But with this new hash, that's not going to be a problem in the future. So we have a couple of different options for the underlying platform. For this case, we're going to use a Java 21, which is the latest major version of Java that we currently have available.
Very nice.
Yes, on Windows, because this demonstration is going to be Windows specific. We have other options for Linux. As you can see, you can actually deploy a container to app service, which is a Linux feature, but it's focused on Windows for now. And then the final step is to select your app service plan. I have an existing app service plan, but for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to create a new one. What an app service plan is the underlying virtual machine that the platform runs on. So there are different options for sizes, durability, different things like that. But that's going to depend on the use case for the application. So let's just call this Spring Demo ASP2 because I already have ASP1. And then we have all of the different pricing options, but I'll just put on basic because hosting a parking page should not be very resource intensive.
No PV3 isolated for this one.
Exactly. Just bare minimum here. So at this point, we can create a database that's associated with the app, and creating a database at this point is very convenient if you don't currently have a resource. And that's because as part of creating this database through this particular workflow, the database gets added to a virtual network that your app will also be added to. So it makes it very easy to communicate with the database because it's within the same virtual network. So finding the resource from the application standpoint will be a lot easier. We're not going to do that right now. I'll circle back to that on the other application that I mentioned beforehand.
That's okay. Really cool. Database bit.
Yes, yeah. The goal is to make it as easy as possible to get a minimum viable product shipped. So yeah, that's great. I actually didn't know about that before this, before I started preparing for the demo. So it actually made preparing for the demo a lot easier.
Hey, that's a nice discovery. And that's pretty cool that it can do all that just automatically for you. And to go back real quick, just to the stacks for Java. Now, running Java 21 on app service, that realistically means that it doesn't have to be Spring Boot, right? It could be just about anything as long as it's functions or runs on Java 21. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, Spring Boot's internal web server in this case is a small Tomcat web server. So that's what's actually handling the requests underlying. But yes, any web server can be brought to app service. That's Quarkus, Micronaut, pretty much anything you can think of. Jetty,
Kotlin, whatever.
Yes, exactly.
As long as it compiles to something that has, like it says on the screen, an embedded web server, it should be good to go.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Awesome. The only caveat is that there's a port setting that the web server needs to abide by when we're creating the ASP. You can't just host on port 80. There needs to be a reverse proxy that's interacted with. And the port for that is given at runtime. So that's the only caveat for bringing a different underlying web server. The good news is that for Spring, we already set that for Spring.
Cool.
So
even for
yes.
SpringBoot Apps.
Yes, for SpringBoot, absolutely, yeah. We do already set that configuration for Spring. Yeah, it's a small caveat, but if there's some kind of issue, that's something to check.
Good deal.
Yes. Now, after the database settings, you can also enable GitHub Actions right here during creation. This, again, is something that I'll come back to, but it's pretty easy to enable at this point. You just press enable, associate the correct GitHub account with the basically the account that has access to the repository that you want to create the action for. And as you can see, I can grab my account. I can grab the demo repository, which, yes. So quick aside, this code is hosted on GitHub. And that's, it's pretty standard version control and pattern to have your code on some kind of a Git resource. So
hopefully if you're writing code, you're putting it somewhere and not just,
yes, not just not just on your machine. Yes. So yeah, quick aside, this is also hosted on GitHub. So that's a requirement here. You can select the repository, the branch, and then that will go ahead and automatically enable GitHub Actions deployment for this. This last bit, would you allow basic authentication to deploy code? That's more of a legacy feature and something we'd like to move away from because sending a username and password isn't quite as secure as having a token issued and used programmatically. Basic auth also opens you up to anybody using basic auth to try and get into your app. So we're trying to move away from that.
Better to use something like managed identity or something similar to do like a token sort of passwordless setup where you don't actually have to manage your credentials yourself. The secrets are handled by managed identity.
Yes, yes, and there are lots of different solutions in App Service, but
generally a lot of different secure ways to do it that are better than basic auth.
Exactly, my point exactly. But like I said, we're going to not look at this for now. We're just going to move onward. So if you don't want your app to be accessible to the public, you would remove public access and create probably a network security group that allows for whatever resources that you want to access the app and nobody else. In this case, I do want public access because this is a publicly facing application. So we're going to allow that. Again, there's also App Insights that's enabled by default, and we do not want to disable that. So App Insights, it's an agent that runs the Java code and allows us to have some monitoring statistics on the app and keeps track of that automatically. So it's a great feature, great for debugging. We have that enabled by default, but if there's, say, some kind of an issue with it, it can also be disabled. Issues are not very common anymore. App Insights has had a long time to bake and improve. So we're going to keep that on. Tagging is more for management and bookkeeping, basically. So we're going to ignore that. And then finally, we get a review of everything that was set. So these are all of the settings that we enabled. You can see the runtime, the region in which it's being deployed. We're deploying in Canada Central, which is also very new. And right here, download a template for automation. If we grab this,
talking about earlier, right?
Exactly. So this is Azure Resource Manager's template. And if we grab this, this will allow us to deploy this app again, essentially. We can deploy a copy of the app. This gives us every single thing that we set, and including the region. So if, say, our app gets deleted, we can use this template to recreate it with the exact same settings. If we want to create another app that's similar to this, we can change the name and deploy it again. So that's very important if you intend on creating multiple of these. I don't, so so we're just going to
suited for something like applications at scale, deploying a bunch of web apps that may be relatively similar. I'd assume you could probably script out something like that where you can run a bunch of those templates to deploy a bunch of apps if that's something that's, something you need. Not what we need for a demo, obviously, but.
Exactly. So yes, it's a use case for that. Or if you're creating and deleting the app multiple times, let's say it runs some test code or something, you can have a app be created, run a test, and then be deleted so that it's not charging you money. So that's also that's also good. Yep. So we're going to go ahead and create this. Now it will take just a moment for the deployment to finish up here. Because we're not deploying a huge number of resources, we're just requesting a basic worker. This shouldn't take very long.
Very nice.
Yep.
And just as an aside, for all of this stuff, like we said, it can be done through those templates. It can be done in the portal. Templates probably save you a lot of time if you're deploying those instead of the point and click. Once you know what you want, right? That makes it a whole lot easier. And all this can be done through the CLI too, right? You could use, Azure CLI to deploy really just about whatever you want.
Yes, that's another way to do things programmatically so that you have things consistent. You can run CLI commands. You could have a job that runs CLI commands. And yep, this entire process can be done through Azure CLI.
Pretty cool.
But again, it's just not quite as pretty as the portal.
This is the easiest and prettiest way to show this, by far.
Yeah. Yes. So now that our resource is created, this handled creating the resource group, the underlying app service plan, and then the app itself. Now we can go to the resource here. So this is the actual web app. If we go and visit the default domain for this web app, this will take a minute to load because it's still starting, but we should get the parking page. So this is basically just a little page that says that your app is up.
This tells you it's there, but there's nothing there, right? Haven't deployed anything yet.
Exactly. We don't want to just return a 404 or something like that.
That's a little better, a little more comforting.
Yes. So deployments are handled through Kudu. Even when you're deploying on the CLI, what the endpoint that ends up getting hit is Kudu. Now, if you're not familiar, Kudu is a sidecar app that runs in parallel with the main application. And this gives some management options for the application.
Pretty cool. And how did you get to that exactly? To get to the to-do page?
Right.
There's a
So
little manipulation, right?
yes. So I used a little shortcut. By default, it's hosted at yourappname.scm, source control management.azurewebsites.net. But if you're looking strictly through the portal, I believe it's in Development Tools, Advanced Tools. If you press go here, you reach the...
There we go.
Yes.
Same place.
Yes. So
Pretty
these
cool.
are the advanced tools. But even though it says advanced tools, don't be intimidated. It's pretty simple to use.
Not that advanced.
So this is your first time here. There's a couple of different things that are presented on Kudu. The two most important things for us are going to be the log files directory and the site directory. Log files contains log files. The site directory contains files specific to your web app. So the deployments folder gives you a list of the deployment operations that were performed on the site. Logs is used to make sure that resources are not being touched while another resource is being used. It's to, let's say if you have two deployments going at once, one will hold onto the site, finish deploying, and then the next deployment will run. So that's what that's for. And then www root is the actual hosted files. If you're familiar with IIS or, well, the underlying is IIS. So at this route, we can then deploy our application. So I have here the compiled application as an executable jar. And we're going to take this, drag it, and drop it.
Now that's pretty cool.
Yes.
You just have to get the jar first, right? Which I'm going to assume if you're a Java developer, you should hopefully know what that is.
Yes.
But getting a jar is, I mean, there's a couple different ways in App Service, right? You could use things like Maven. You can use, I mean, however else, right?
Yes. So for my local environment, I'm using Maven. So standard pom.xml, it just builds to a compiled jar. If you're using something like GitHub Actions, you can also specify a Maven build step, a Gradle build step. You could do your own custom Java C command. That seems like the hard way to do it, but if you have some requirement for that, you can knock your socks off.
Those build tools, the helpers like Maven and Gradle, they exist for a reason. So hopefully people will use those. I know I haven't used Gradle much, but I've used Maven more extensively, and honestly, I like it. It makes things a lot easier. Rather than, the old Java C and hoping that you got all your dependencies in there.
Yes, yeah. For any amount of scalability, you're going to want Maven or Gradle. Okay, so we've deployed the app.jar, and what
just as a quick question, does that matter what you name that file, that app.jar?
So app.jar is a convention for us. If you name it app.jar, that's the highest priority of things that will be run. If the site finds a different jar file, it will try to run that if it's an executable jar. But to keep things consistent, we recommend naming it app.jar. This is just a convention that we use.
Cool.
Yes. Yeah. So to keep things consistent, this would be a good way of doing it. So for example, if you have like two versions of your app, blah, 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 my app 1 and my app 2, and both of them are executable jars, which one runs is going to be non-deterministic. So it would be better to just have a single file named app.jar and let that be. If you have other jar files here, like library files, that's fine. It will prioritize app.jar first, and it won't try to run something that isn't executable. But this just keeps things neat. And I'd highly recommend naming your executable app.jar.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
That's very helpful.
Okay, good. The other thing is, now that we've deployed, a deployment should queue the site to restart. So let's check what's running here. So this is still the parking page, as you can see.
Cache. Browser cache.
So there are two things that we can try here. We can force the site to start and stop, which is what I'm going to do. So the site has stopped, and let's just verify that it's stopped. Okay, we get a 503, which is the service has stopped.
That's great.
Well, it'll start with a 503, and then eventually there should be a 403 that comes up. Yep, here we go.
There we go.
And that's just saying that the app is stopped. It's slightly different than a 502 or error, because a 502 means something went wrong. We'd rather return 403 saying, hey, there's nothing here for you to look at. And if we start
that, hey, if you want it on, you should go start it. That's kind of the fix for that page, right?
Exactly. The other thing that this demonstrates is that you should not deploy your resources directly to the production site. The pattern that we recommend is through a slot. So we have this thing called deployment slots. This particular ASP, because it's the basic ASP, does not have slots. But if I was on a premium app service plan, I could create a slot called stage. The app could warm up on stage, be deployed on stage, tested on stage. And then when we're ready to swap production and stage, we initiate what's called a slot swap. And stage goes to prod goes to stage. And the endpoint that you have specified will begin targeting stage instead of production. So this is a good demonstration of the use case of that. So you don't get this. So you don't get this 502, 403, 502 issues. So now I'm reloading the site, and because it needs to, again, cold start, which is it waits for the first request, and then once you get a first request, it begins running. That can be avoided using slots, because you can get stage to warm up and then swap to prevent this delay. But this is a good example of why we recommend slots. So we'll let that get up for a minute. Any other questions or comments, Denver?
Let me see. Do we have any questions in the chat? Just a reminder to everyone on the stream, please put your questions in the chat if you have anything that you are wondering about how this works. As an aside, there's another demo that I actually recorded, and I think we have some post-production work being done on it now that should be out. That'll actually show this staging production slot swap in action. It's pretty cool. It's also a Spring Boot app. But in this case, it's sort of it could be more of a next step to this one, because it's a little bit more of a complicated Spring Boot app. It has a database, and it does use AI. It has Azure OpenAI and managed identity for everything. Managed identity controls your access to your database, controls your connection to GitHub Actions for deployments, and it controls your connection to Azure OpenAI. What's wrong with me? for everything that the app needs to actually do. For the, where was I going with this? For the video portion of that should be coming out, I think, in the next couple weeks here. There is going to be a blog post that comes out following that. Actually, as a precursor to that, we should have the blog post coming up soon. So if Spring Boot deployments on App Service are your thing, be watching for that. It'll get shared out on Twitter, and it will be posted likely to Tech Community coming up here soon. But it looks like we have an app up and running now. So what's next?
Okay, so as I said, excellent demonstration of why you want to warm up on a stage slot as opposed to hot swapping in production. Now we have an app on App Service. So the demonstration, I guess, is how simple deployments end up being with our very simple drag and drop interface on Kudu.
And that's
again,
for Windows, right? For Windows, you can do that. For Linux,
yeah.
it's a little different.
I believe that so Kudu also runs on Linux, but it has its own fork of Kudu, so it might have a different feature set. I believe that the drag and drop interface still exists there, but I'm not going to test that right now in case I'm wrong.
That'll be for me writing a blog post after this later. I'll go find out if we can do the same thing. I think you might be right. I think you might be able to now. I think they're pretty close feature parity wise.
Yes. If not, you can definitely zip the app.jar and place the zip file through a drag and drop interface, which is how it used to work on Windows. But I believe that the feature parity is pretty close at this point, if not exactly the same. So I have a feeling that should just work.
We love things that just work over here. That's kind of what it did just work. Quite literally drag, drop it, and then here's an app.
Yes. So to show off a couple of other things, the first thing that you're going to want to do once your app is up and running, or even before, is to enable logging, because you want to see what happens if there's a problem. See what's happening if there's a problem, I should say. So we have many different logging options. Some are legacy, some are newer. These logging options are a little bit older, app service logs, a little bit older, tried and true sort of thing. These allow for logging, as it says here, on the file system. So this will save to that log folder that we briefly mentioned. So log files. If you have logging enabled, things will begin appearing here. Because logging is not enabled, there's nothing here. But you can enable app logs to the file system. So if your app puts out some information on standard out or standard error, it'll pick these up. The level is the minimum level to log. So if you have error, it'll only pick up standard error. If you pick up information or verbose, it'll pick up standard out and standard error. You can log to a blob, which is just in Azure storage. Same thing. You can specify the storage container here and retention days. Web server logging is more about the underlying IAS. So you can get more specific logs about how HTTP requests are being handled and processed from that front. So those are app service logs, and you probably do want some of these, especially if you're debugging. Maybe not for day-to-day in production, unless you have some sort of legacy app that you're bringing over, and it enables these by default, which is fine. The other logging, which is newer, a little bit more feature-rich, is through diagnostic settings. So for Java SE, by default, we have console logs enabled. So if we grab console logs and send to Log Analytics workspace, I have a workspace that I'm working with called the default here. Oh, and we have to name it, of course. So this is Spring Demo 3 diags. Sure. So we can also log HTTP logs, platform logs, authentication logs. The ones that we care about right now are console logs because the Spring Boot application is actually emitting those. These are emitted by the platform itself, these other ones. The other thing is for Java SE, we currently don't have an implementation of application logs versus console logs. Tomcat does have this enabled. So by default, app logs created on Tomcat are saved as application logs. But for now, on Java SE, you want console logging. So we can save this diagnostic setting. And great. I think that, yep. So what this does is the console logs generated by the application are going to be made available in this Log Analytics workspace, which gives us a way of querying the logs. So the logs that we want are app service console logs. And let's take the last 10. And we're going to order by time generated, descending, so that we get the newest logs first.
Now, this sort of query language, this looks familiar to me. Should it look familiar?
Yes. So our query language is called the Custo query language, which we use on the backend for debugging applications, customer apps. We have our own tables of information of things that are happening. But this has been extended recently, so customers also have a way of querying some of their logs too. So this is the Custo querying language.
Yeah, Custo, at least from my experience, because I'm not a dev, I'm a product manager, I can still use it. So that should tell you something about it. It's really very intuitive. At least I think so.
Yes, it's a friendlier version of SQL. So it's still a querying language. If you came from SQL, you would probably be familiar with this. It would probably be very easy to learn because it has a lot of the same paradigms and commands, even though it's slightly different. So this is maybe a little less verbose than your average SQL statement. So it's a little bit streamlined. But yeah, so we can see now that we have the logging enabled, we're getting some logs. So yeah, this is this looks like a error log. So because this these at statements would be like an exception trace. So maybe there's something wrong going on. So let's expand a little bit. So there was an error running application context on a different app. Yeah, so, I see. So these logs are from demo 1, as you can see here. Demo 1 includes a database connection, and it looks like that database connection wasn't able to be made. So Yeah.
That's actually pretty cool to show something like that.
Yeah, it shows an actual exception that you might hit in production.
In the real world. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's great. Um, but yeah, it looks like access was denied for my user. So I'm going to have to debug why that is. uh, but yeah, that'll be interesting. But yeah, and this is just because all of my demo apps are using the same workspace. So we're getting console logs from all of them. So if you want,
the log analytics workspace thing works, right? As in it's not a, they're not exclusive to a particular web app, but you could have multiple web apps in one, or you could make them exclusive. It's sort of a flexible thing, right?
yes, it completely depends on how you want to manage things. If you want them all to log to the same workspace and be able to query that in a single place, great, that's available. If you want to only send logs to one log analytics workspace for one app, that's also great. And with diagnostic settings, you can send some logs to, say, an aggregate log workspace that has all of your logs from all of your apps, or you can send those to a log analytics workspace which only has one app associated with it. But that all depends on how you want to manage things and how basically the requirements for apps. Because if you have apps that are related to each other, for example, if you're running microservices, you might want multiple apps to write to the same log analytics workspace so that you can compare the time when an operation takes place on one service and when it reaches another service. And sending to the same log analytics workspace is great for that because you can order by time generated and see the delta between when something happens on one app and something happens on the other app. So that's a possible use case for using the single log analytics workspace for multiple apps.
Very nice.
Yeah. So a couple other things that I wanted to cover real quick. So for the, I'm going to kind of do the cooking show thing. As I mentioned, I had a couple of other demo apps ready to go.
I'm assuming this is deployments related if it's cooking show, because that's, you don't want to wait for a build.
Exactly. So this is a build and deploy operation that took place on demo 1. So this is a GitHub action that was called to build and deploy the demo 1 app, which is very similar to the demo app. It's a Spring Boot application. The only difference is that it has a database connection. The build steps are defined in this YAML file, which is on the repository at this directory, GitHub Workflows. And what's cool is that I didn't write this at all. I didn't write this. It was generated automatically by the platform and added to my repository. So if we go to the app 3, I'll show in the deployment center, which is where we handle deployments. There are a couple of other ways to deploy. You can specify FTPS endpoints to deploy from and use FTP to transfer files directly onto and off of the app. You do have to enable this manually through a separate setting because, again, we're trying to move away from username and password type auth But if that's a requirement, or if you just want to hook that into a legacy workflow that you had from your own build pipeline, that's fine. You can do that. But what's more interesting, a little bit newer, a little bit more CI/CD, right there, continuous deployment options. We can deploy directly from GitHub, Bitbucket, an Azure repository, or your own Git repository. So if you have a private Git repo that isn't hosted on GitHub, you can also use that for CI/CD, which is pretty cool. But I'm going to focus on GitHub Actions because that's a little bit more interesting, I think.
Interesting. I mean, yeah, GitHub Actions is cool. It does a
Yeah.
lot of stuff. And I mean, from my experience using it, it's really easy. I mean, just it's about as easy as it can be to sort of point, click, and then you get the default workflow that for most apps, the default workflow file, it just works. It'll build it and deploy it for you.
Yeah, exactly. So if you choose GitHub as your source, you sign into GitHub. I happen to already be signed in through my Microsoft account, which is the same one as here. I choose the repository, which is SpringBoot demo, and main branch. And like I said, you can use basic auth here, but we're trying to move away from that and use user assigned identity instead, which provides a token basically to perform deployment operations. And that's, again, all handled by the platform. You shouldn't need to think about that at all. Now, because it's user identity, you need to have an identity to associate with that. Fortunately, when you create a resource group, you should also be able to create an identity for that resource group. So in this case, we have from the demo 1 group, we have an identity there. And we can preview the action pipeline file that's being generated. So this should look very familiar to the file that I just showed on demo 1. This sets up picking the correct version of Java, finding the jar artifact, and then grabbing the correct client to log in and deploy to the right web app. The other thing is, as mentioned, we're deploying right to production, not a recommended pattern, but you can also set this to deploy to stage first, and then perform a slot swap operation afterwards. Again,
this file, just by judging by the name that says build with Maven, this is a Maven build, right?
Yeah, exactly. So before the deploy step, we have the build step, and the build step builds with Maven. That's the default. You can build with whatever you want to build with. You just have to modify this template slightly.
Cool.
So this isn't its own Maven build step. This is just run this command and then grab the resulting artifact from this command. So with some slight modification, you could have this run Gradle. You could have this run, like I said, a Java C command.
Build tooling or none if you want to just Java C it if you're a little crazy. Exactly. You want to do that. It could be anything.
Yes, but the default is Maven. But that would generate this file that would then be added to the repository. So if we go and look at the demo repository, we don't have the GitHub Actions folder created. And when we, save this, set up the pipeline, what'll happen is it'll create a commit to add that action. Okay, well, so let's save the settings. Let's check and see. Oh, perfect. Here we go. So created the file, committed, pushed it to master main.
I still do the same thing.
Yeah, it's just, different convention being used nowadays. And yeah, so that was just created completely automatically, which is
the thing with this demo is easy. It's made to be as seamless as possible. I mean, a lot of point and click and drag, and you get, in this case, basically point and click to get CI/CD, which is pretty cool that they can actually do that now.
Yeah. It's really great. We're constantly trying to make it easier for the customer to get their app onto our services. The other thing is, now that we've uploaded this, it automatically triggers. So the build has already succeeded. So the Maven build step, as it was defined, has already succeeded. And now it's doing the deployment step, which if we go to, this might take a little bit if you remember from our previous step. So this is demo 1, which is also called demo complete. But if we go to the action, this is what basically what the successful run looks like. And like I said, the cooking show thing, this took 6 minutes. So let's just say that it's
probably going to deploy just fine. I mean, it linked it all up the same way. That's the whole point here, is that the point and click does a really good job at linking things together the right way. And as long as you have an identity set up existing, or just even create a new managed identity, which is probably best to have one specifically for that, kind of does a lot in the background of actually, linking things together for you, and makes it really easy to build and then ultimately deploy without a lot of hiccups. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's great. And like I said, all these things are sort of drag and drop. They're a la carte. So if you need some components, but you don't need others, you can choose the ones that work best for your use case. Yep. But I see that we're going pretty long. I had some database stuff to show off, but maybe we can save that for your more complicated app in the future, Denver.
Yeah. Why don't we save the database stuff for the next time, which will be probably a couple months from now, for the next Java-related one. But yeah, thank you again, Gregory, for all of that. That was super cool. It's really nice to see the ease and flexibility of the platform when it comes to stuff like this. Deployments, even just hosting some sort of a fat jar app, whether it's Java-based, Kotlin, Clojure, whatever. As long as you get yourself a fat jar that functions and adheres to basically that one caveat that you said, just that one sort of extra deal for anything that's not Spring Boot, you should be good to go. And that's pretty cool. That's really, really cool that it can do that.
Yes. And well, we have a looks like there's a permissions issue, which that's curse of the demo, right? Yeah, I think that's just a matter of evaluating my managed identity and making sure that it has the correct permissions. Yeah. So
don't forget, it needs to be a contributor. I've done the same thing too if it needs to deploy something.
Exactly.
You can't just read. You got to have write permissions for that, which I think I was demoing something and had the exact same thing happen a little while ago.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So I think this is just my identity needs a little extra permission, but
yeah, it is what it is. But thank you again, Gregory, for joining us. This was really awesome to have you. Hopefully we'll have you back at some point for more of these if you enjoyed it. If not, don't worry about it, but hopefully you enjoyed and it was fun. As a reminder to everyone watching, our next live stream is on November 13th. This will be, I believe, app service environment, ACE related, for zone redundancy. We're going to have Jordan Selig join us for that one, which should be an awful lot of fun, pretty exciting stuff. And then after that, we'll see if we can, I don't think we have anything planned yet, but we'll find something for the next month after that one. December, I believe we are skipping January. So just as a heads up, we'll post some more stuff on the Twitter as a reminder. But as always, thank you again, everyone, for joining us today, everyone who is here. Be on the lookout for an additional blog post to come out soon that'll have a lot of this same information in text format as it pertains to Java SE on App Service, running SpringBoot apps, all those fun, good things. And some of that database stuff that Gregory mentioned, but we didn't have time to get into today. But we'll have, more advanced demo stuff related to especially SpringBoot on App Service, since it's a pretty cool destination for SpringBoot apps. Makes a lot of things really easy for you. It's a great PaaS platform. We certainly like it a lot, and we hope you do too. So anyways, thank you again, Gregory, and thank you to everyone watching. We'll see you next time.